again to the series of video lectures on cultural studies. We are today at the end of Module 1, and this lecture, the 10th lecture, is on Poststructuralism. As you are aware, we looked at two other theories. We began with structuralism, and then we went on to Marxism, for which we devoted 2 lectures, and today we are going to look at Poststructuralism. Needless to say, this doesn't mean that these are the only 3 theories in cultural studies. As I had mentioned earlier, what I would do is, when I go on to the other modules, for instance, when I look at key concepts, gender for instance, that is when I would be looking at feminist theory. When I go into the module which deals with virtual culture, I would look at posthumanism and so on. So welcome back once again. As you are also aware, these lectures are being recorded under the National Program on Technology Enhanced Learning, which is an initiative, a joint venture by the Indian Institutes of Technology and the Indian Institute of Science. My name is Lisa, and I teach English at IIT Guwahati. Well, as always, we do a recap of what we had discussed in the last lecture, and you would recall that the last lecture, lecture 9 of Module 1, was devoted to Marxism. It was the second part of the 2-part lectures on the cultural theory of Marxism. Well, I shall run through very quickly over which I think are the important points in the last lecture. You would recall this quotation from the Communist Manifesto: "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles." And we saw that over the ages, under different modes of production, we may divide the population into 2 binary opposites, 2 major classes, so to speak, which are master-slave, the overlord-serf in feudalism, master-slave in ancient slavery, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat under capitalism, and the colonizer and the colonized under imperialism. We also looked at 2 very important concepts which are really the building blocks of Marxism, and these are the base and the superstructure. You would recall that we understood the base as comprising the relations of production and the forces of production, that is, in any mode of production at any given point of time. And we saw that Marx argued that on the base, on this foundation, so to speak, there always arises the superstructure, okay, which are to do with our cultural arrangements. If you look at all of these are really our cultural arrangements, and they comprise the legal system, the family, education, religion, and ultimately our consciousness, which is within this theory our social consciousness. Next, we went on to define ideology as a set of beliefs that people hold, which act as a set of lenses through which we look at the world, and these ideologies give us maps of meaning. Okay, you would recall from the first 2 or 3 lectures that with which I began these lecture series, that culture is also known as maps of meaning. So ideology, which is a set of beliefs, values that we hold, give us or form for us or construct, so to speak, for us maps of cultural meaning. Then we also looked at how consent is manufactured from people through processes of socialization, which are done through certain cultural institutions like religion, education, and the mass media. We looked at the concept of hegemony as leadership with the consent of the led, and we looked very quickly, of course, not in detail, at Althusser's repressive state apparatuses like the army, the police, etc., which are coercive measures to gain our consent, and the ideological state apparatuses, which are really soft policing. These are through the cultural institutions like media, etc. And meaning formation we saw as really a site of, a very contentious site, a site of struggle. There's a tussle for meaning where among dominant groups, and ideologies seek to maintain the status quo, and to standardize meaning. Then we also looked at what practice meant for Karl Marx, and the very famous quotation, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it." Well, we now come to what is the topic for today's lecture and discussion. Excuse me. The topic is post-structuralism, and you know that we looked at structuralism, and as I said, perhaps some of you may feel that I should have done post-structuralism after structuralism, but the reason why I did put in 2 lectures on Marxism is that Marxism may be looked as basically a structural way of looking at culture, and post-structuralism moves away from certainties, moves away from looking at structures, and that is why I decided to keep post-structuralism till the end of this module. Well, what is the difference between structuralism and post-structuralism? You note here immediately that there is a post here, okay? Structuralism and post-structuralism. So there are 2 meanings here. One is obviously as coming after, which would mean that post-structuralism is a continuation, okay? A continuation of structuralism, which means that there are certain elements in structuralism that are also present in post-structuralism. And on the other hand, it is also a critique, and we had occasion to look at the term critique briefly in one of my earlier lectures. And what is a critique? A critique is not exactly criticism. A critique is, is an exercise, right, that you do in order to lay bare the assumptions of a certain theory. Okay. So, what are the assumptions or the presumptions of a particular theory, and which leads that theory to argue in a certain way, right? So, post-structuralism is both both a continuation and a critique of structuralism, and in what follows we shall see how. Let me quickly quote from the Sage Handbook by Chris Barker. Some of you would find this extremely helpful in the sense that the concepts and terms have been very beautifully explained in this handbook. The prefix post clearly suggests after. Thus, post-structuralism is after structuralism, in that the terms of this philosophical stream are ones that involve both the absorption of key ideas from structuralism and a critique and a transformation. Though we don't stop at critique, we also aim at a transformation of structuralism or structuralist ideas and premises. I strongly feel that we need to bring in a term from philosophy here, a branch of philosophy which looks at knowledge, okay? Because knowledge within the post-structuralist theoretical enterprise is highly problematized, okay? So it is important for us to know certain terms from philosophy, and that has always been my belief, and as far as possible my practice, even when I teach in the classrooms in IIT Guwahati. What is epistemology? Epistemology is, or maybe very briefly defined as, the theory of knowledge. Okay? So what do we mean when we say theory of knowledge? When we say theory of knowledge, we would include, among other things, these three things. Okay? One is the origin or the source of knowledge. What is, if I say I have a piece of knowledge, then I need to ask, I need to theorize, I need to speculate, I need to do maybe a critique of that piece of knowledge, and I would first ask, where did that knowledge come from? Where did I get my knowledge? Is it from am I appealing to the rationalist school, or am I appealing to the empirical school, or like many people, am I appealing to a certain mystical source for knowledge, right? So one is the source or origin of knowledge. Two, the limits and boundaries. When we say limits and boundaries, we do not exactly mean the limitations. What we would really mean here is to ask questions like, what are the boundaries within which this piece of knowledge that we are talking about, okay, or we are forwarding, what are the boundaries within which such knowledge is possible, okay? So we need to, what we call, delimit the boundaries, okay? And what is the state of knowledge, or what is the status of that piece of knowledge, okay? So these things go into epistemology, and as I said, I reiterate that it is important to look at this branch of philosophy when we talk about post-structuralism. Now, if I asked you, what do you think about truth? Okay, what is truth? And in this case, truth with a capital T. Do you think truth is universal? Do you think, do you hold that there is something called universal truth which all of us could access? Okay, stay with this point, and this will come, this will fall into place as far as structuralism is concerned in the next few minutes. Second, what is belief and what is knowledge? Okay, is belief the same as knowledge? Okay. Another question would be, is belief, when does belief become knowledge, right? In epistemology, we hold that knowledge is a belief that has been justified, okay? So when does belief become knowledge? A belief becomes knowledge when it has been justified. So belief is known as justified knowledge. Now, I would again use a quotation from Chris Barker, and I shall explain it in relation to what I have just raised. Knowledge is not a question in post-structuralism of true discovery. Okay, look at this. Knowledge is nothing to do with true discovery. I have discovered this, and this is truth, and it applies also to science. Okay, it applies to science in the sense that we cannot take any piece of knowledge for granted. Well, let's continue to read this. Knowledge is not a question of true discovery, but of the construction of interpretations. And I need you to look at this word closely, right? One is, on the other hand, you have this claim within, a structuralist framework, for instance, within a structuralist framework that which says that it is possible to discover truth. On the other hand, within post-structuralism, we do not talk about discoveries and truth, we talk about only interpretations, right? So the world, there is data in front of you, reality as data, and that data comes to you in the form of interpretation. So knowledge is not a question of true discovery, but of the construction of interpretations about the world that are taken to be true. Okay? Insofar as the idea of truth has an historical purchase, it is the consequence of power, that is, of whose interpretations come to count as truth. Okay? So it is where post-structuralism holds that you cannot look at knowledge, truth in a very naive or at face value. Whenever we have interpretation, we will ask whose interpretation is it, or it is, okay? And we know that that interpretation is tied to another word, very seminal, and which we shall look at here briefly, but in another module, it would be the topic of a whole lecture, okay? So whose interpretations, okay? The play of power, that is important. So therefore, knowledge, truth, universal truth in post-structuralism, these become simply a matter of A, interpretation, okay? B, language games. Recall from my first two lectures that we had, on the first or second lecture, we looked at Wittgenstein's concept of language games and how language and language games, okay, these two terms are seminal to cultural studies as as different from the study of culture. You recall in my first or second lecture I had mentioned this. If at all we have to make a difference between the study of culture in an anthropological sense and doing cultural studies. Okay, so truth, universal truth, knowledge, these are matters according to post-structuralism relating to interpretation, language games, and power. Okay, so the whole you from your childhood you may have heard of this slogan, knowledge is power. So knowledge is power takes on a wholly new sort of connotation, and you recall Roland Barthes' differentiation between denotation and connotation. So it takes on a whole new connotation when we talk about knowledge is power within cultural studies. So, well, now how does post-structuralism problematize meaning? You would recall that in structuralism we learned that meaning, according to the Saussurean theory, meaning is differential, okay, and relational. It operates in a network, in a system of structures in which meaning emanates or meaning comes about in a differential and relational network. Now, what post-structuralism does is it furthers, right? It furthers this theory to, well, quite an extreme, really. Now, let's look at it, and we shall see a seminal figure here, okay, a theorist here. Again, in structuralism, we saw that meaning comes about as organization of signs, and a certain stability of meaning is established through structures. Now, in post-structuralism, this whole differential and relational aspects of meaning is pushed to such a limit that meaning is seen as something that is endlessly deferred. Now, what is the meaning of defer? You know that the meaning of defer is to postpone, right? Because you defer something, you defer an appointment, etc. So meaning is deferred. That is, you can never come or never arrive at a complete meaning. Meaning is always provisional, and meaning is always deferred in the sense that you can never grasp. Okay, you can never grasp a signifier totally. And this is the theorist that I had referred to just a while ago. His name is Jacques Derrida, who is a French theorist, and I'm sure many of you have heard of Derrida. Derrida held the following: because of the very nature of words or signs as being relational and not referential. You recall that signs are not referential. They do not by themselves refer directly, okay, or in a one-to-one correspondence with reality. Okay, they are not referential, they are relational. They will now, because of this feature of words or signs, they will always carry with them traces of other related words and signs. And one of the examples, that is a very common example in structuralism, which I'm sure every teacher, almost every teacher uses, is the difference between cat, hat, rat, mat, sat. And structuralism holds that the meaning of rat or cat or mat comes about not by itself, but in a system of differences within the whole sign. Okay, these words where only the consonants are different. So we understand them in a system of differences. Now Derrida holds that when you say cat or rat or mat, each of these words will carry traces of other related words and signs. For instance, when you in another axis, when you say cat, there's also the trace of cat being not a dog. Okay, say two domestic animals. A cat is just simply not a cat. It is the fact, it's not simply that it is a cat, but more importantly, within the structuralist and post-structuralist frameworks, the cat is not a dog. Okay, so Derrida says that every term, because it is in a relational framework, okay, it can't help but carry the traces of the related signs that are there in the system. Therefore, and let's look at this slide. Therefore, Derrida says, uses a French word called difference, and this is the term. He says that we should not use the term difference but difference, which means both. This word difference means both to differ and to differ. Okay, difference from structuralism and difference from post-structuralism. The word difference carries with it the meaning of both. So meaning is both, it both differs and is forever differed. I would like to quickly look at an apt quotation from Pramod Nair, a book which I had mentioned in my first lecture as, which I think is would be a very useful book for those of you who are beginning cultural studies. And as you know, these lectures are recorded primarily for students who opt for humanities electives in engineering colleges. So in that sense, this book I think would be very useful to you. So the quotation runs thus: thus, reading or interpretation is the movement through the chain of signs, seeking, and look at this, a temporary meaning, okay, a temporary meaning from or at each halt. So meaning is provisional, meaning is always temporary, and why so? Because meaning is deferred. Okay, this suggests that every signifier, a word or a sign, leads not to a stable end signified, but to more signifiers. This is very, very important. Okay, a signified within structuralism, we saw a signifier leads to a signified. The signifier was what? Signifier was a sound, okay, pattern, or it was a mark on the board or the page or this a PC, and the signified was the concept. But this is how they post-structuralists revise structuralists or structuralism, in that a signifier would not lead to a signified, but to more signifiers. And this really is a very seminal point that we need to grasp when we are doing post-structuralism. Now, what does this mean? Nair says this implies that meaning is never fully graspable. So there's always something in meaning that escapes us. Okay, when we think that we've gotten hold of meaning, It is an illusion, meaning escapes us simply because it, remember what Derrida said, a sign would carry traces of, traces from other signs. This implies that meaning is never fully graspable and the final meaning is always postponed or deferred. Therefore, the very categories, now let's look at this, this representation here, the very categories with which we carve out the world, the very categories through which we understand the world, okay, are not essentialist and they are not ontological. Okay, they have no clear-cut, once and for all given essences. Okay, so our very categories themselves are what? They are social constructions, and very importantly, they are social constructions through language, which means that they are social constructions through what? Through sign systems. Okay, a very radical departure from previous ways of looking at the world, at reality, at our categories, for instance. Okay, so categories are social constructions, and that through language. So they are linguistic constructions. Therefore, in language, we would then say, following Derrida, that there are no pure or stable signifieds. Okay, there are no pure signifieds. Okay, this is what we had looked at just a while ago. Hence, words like deferral, substitution, and supplementation, okay, within the meaning system. Okay, words, meaning is deferred, meaning is always substituted by another meaning, and which is the Derridian term, there is, there's always a supplementation in the whole meaning process. Now, using these theoretical tools of poststructuralism onto our understanding of culture, how would we then use this for our understanding of culture as a theoretical tool? We would say that in culture, identity, okay, the question of identity, and I shall devote a whole lecture to identity. For now, it's important for us to look at what poststructuralism talks about identity, and this is the thrust of cultural studies. Identity is therefore always unstable. Identity is forever recreated. Now, when you think that you have a particular identity, okay, you have a particular identity as a person, as a human being, as belonging to a certain community or some region, etc. Okay, you feel that you have hold a certain identity, or people look at you with through this identity. But this theoretical thrust, okay, or this theoretical underpinning of cultural studies would tell you that identity is as cultural meaning, as personal meaning, okay, is following the sign system. In poststructuralism, identity is always unstable and is forever being recreated. More about this when we look at identity in Module 2 as a key concept. Therefore, identity is shifting and identity is always contingent, that is dependent on contingent events. Okay. Now, after Derrida, we have to look at another a French philosopher named Michel Foucault, and Foucault is central to cultural studies, particularly when this very seminal concept in cultural studies called power is concerned. Okay. Now, how does Foucault differ from Derrida? Foucault says, and this is very important, please look at this sentence. Foucault says that, well, meaning is not to be seen in terms of a chain of eternal deference. Foucault would perhaps hold that it is a futile exercise if meaning is seen as something that is eternally deferred, eternally ungraspable. There is no point really in continuing sort of ad nauseum, or ad infinitum. It doesn't lead us anywhere. Well, we may accept that feature of meaning, but he says it is more important to see at, or to look at the regulation of meaning. And Foucault drew our attention to this other aspect of meaning by saying this meaning is regulated by this word. Look at this slide here, please. Meaning is regulated by power. Okay, let's see how. As I said, power is deeply connected to knowledge. In fact, we've always learned that knowledge is power, knowledge is going to review power. But how is this power-knowledge relationship looked at in cultural studies through a Foucauldian theoretical lenses, so to speak? Foucault says that every discourse, okay, a discourse, we looked at it very briefly, and I'm going to look at it again in module 2 as a key concept. A discourse is a regulated way of speaking about anything. Okay, a discourse. Well, what do we have? We have letters. Letters combine and form words. Words combine and form sentences, and sentences combine to form discourses. Okay, so Foucault held that discourse is not innocent. Discourse is not to be taken at face value. Okay, discourse, he held, is a way, it's a regulated way of speaking about something. For instance, let's look at the topic man. Let's look at the concept man. Okay, Foucault would say that there are several discourses. Okay, there are several discourses which are going to talk about man, or say Homo sapiens, or human nature, if you will. Every discourse is going to talk about man within its regulated way of speaking. Number one, religion. He says religion would give you a certain picture of man. Okay, for instance, religion may say man is made in the image of God, or religion may say that man is a fallen angel. Okay, science is also going to talk about man from within its discourses. Biology, for instance, is going to talk about man as as a complex organism. Okay, psychiatry again is going to talk about man in within its own discourses, within its own premises, within its own axioms. Law is going to look at man in a different sort of a way, and economics, through its theories, through its discourse, which is a regulated way of speaking, is going to talk about man in different ways. Okay, so the point here is, whichever discourse, and remember we're talking about power. Okay, whichever discourse, okay, is powerful, so to speak. Okay, will lead people to look at any topic, any subject or matter of discussion, anything, okay, through its practices, and it is going to sort of train people, okay, to speak in that regulated sort of way. So all of us speak from certain discourses, and according to Foucault, really there is no escaping discourse. So discourse or knowledge and power, that is knowledge again, knowledge and power, combine to do what? They combine to create and control us as subjects. Okay, subject again, subjectivity will be my next lecture, which is lecture 1 in module 2. Suffice it for here to simply know that Foucault held that discourse in the form of knowledge and power, they create and control us as subjects. And this is again the realizing or acknowledging the political nature of power and knowledge. Therefore, the subject, that is you and I, okay, the subject is really in the ultimate analysis is an effect of discourse. Okay, man seen in a religious sort of a way is not really what man is, or man seen from an economics point of view is not exactly the totality of what man is. Okay, within these two discourses, so religion or economics, man is an effect. It is a result, so to speak, okay, of our looking at man through the discourse of either religion or economics. Okay, so the subject, you and I, are really the effect of discourse. And this is instantiated or established by language, we know, which is seminal to the structuralist and post-structuralist theories, and practice. Both language and practice bring about this, bring about construction of the subject as an effect of discourse. So, therefore, discourse is the power to name, right? Names, labels, explanations, definitions, everything, okay, come from discourse. And through the power to name, discourse is given, or discourse has the ability to create a subject. There is nothing ontologically, which is our subjectivity. Our subjectivity is a creation, okay, by discourse. So, in the same way, therefore, culture, which, as we had discussed, the maps of meaning, culture is also shifting. Culture is also provisional in the sense that the maps of meaning, they achieved a temporary, look at this slide here please, achieve a temporary stability through discursive practices. Recall what Pramodna said in that quotation of just a while ago, that there is always a temporary meaning, okay. So, cultures too, like our subjectivities, okay, they have a temporary stability through discursive practices. So, again from Barker, let me quickly look at his words. Like its predecessor, that is structuralism, post-structuralism is anti-humanist. Now, remember we had said that to be anti-humanist is not to be against human beings, nor is it not holding humanitarian values. Anti-humanist is simply a philosophical stance, or a stance in the history of ideas, when you hold that the human is not the center of reference, okay. Therefore, like its predecessor, structuralism, post-structuralism is anti-humanist in its decentering of the unified, coherent human subject as the origin of stable meanings. If there is no, the whole is, if man is only an effect of various discourses, and every discourse is partial, then he cannot be the center of reference, or she cannot be the center of reference, point of reference, okay, and is not the originator of stable meanings. Second, there are no stable meanings. Later, of course, Foucault decided not to leave us with this sort of, maybe you feel it's really quite a dark picture, as he says later in his later works that there is, we do self-construct ourselves, our subjectivities, okay, in the sense that we can reflect on them and we can reinvent ourselves. So we are not just slaves. Like, remember Richard Dawkins in the essay on memetics? Similarly here, we are not, he said that we are not slaves of our genes and mims. We have foresight, we have true altruism. Almost in a similar manner, Foucault, though of course in a different domain, he says that our subjectivities can be reflected upon, and our subjectivities can be even reinvented, okay? Similarly, Richard Rorty was also another philosopher, comes away from such a dark picture, and he says, well, we should take the pragmatic path, okay? He says that we should live in the knowledge of plurality, okay? We should understand that we can use a variety of languages for a variety of practices, okay? And therefore it would, to adopt such a pluralist approach and to accept the fact that we live in, we use different sorts of languages for different practices, which is not a bad thing. It doesn't really make us seem so passive after all, passive constructs, right? A related topic here, as I quickly look at it, and I look at it elsewhere again, is postmodernism, because poststructuralism and postmodernism are so closely related, which is postmodernism is a reaction, like poststructuralism to structuralism. Postmodernism is a reaction to modernism, and at the same time, as some hold, it is also a continuation of the modernist project. Just one or two names here. One is another French philosopher named Lyotard, who, talking about the contemporary world, says that knowledge has, which was problematized in poststructuralism, knowledge is could be today seen because of the information boom. The knowledge is data, simply data, and we see here in the postmodern situation the informatization of knowledge, okay, which gives it a certain surface quality, which we'll talk about just in a while. And this has led to a crisis in the humanities and social sciences, the very fact that knowledge is information. Okay, this has led to a crisis in the humanities and social sciences in the form of an invalidation of objective truth. Okay, and the rejection of meta or grand narratives. Right, grand narratives, for instance, religion is a grand narrative. Postmodernists would hold Marxism, at least doctrine and Marxism, rather historical materialism, an understanding of history through the materialist school, as a grand narrative, which where they have problems with this, because the grand narratives seem to be telling us that there is an objective truth, which is problematized both in poststructuralism and postmodernism. And look at this last point here. He says that this leads to a condition of vertigo. What is vertigo? Vertigo is a condition in which is a condition in which you feel that the world is spinning. Okay, it's a condition. It's a confusing. It's a situation in which you probably feel that it's a chaotic situation, right? Something that makes you feel giddy, almost in a cultural sort of way. Therefore, the thrust is on from meta narratives to micro narratives. Okay, if you don't have truth with a capital T, right? And I'd like to quickly bring in Nietzsche here, Friedrich Nietzsche, who said that truth is nothing but a mobile army of metaphors and metonyms. Okay, so we should settle for micro narratives. Instead of a global regime, we should settle for a local regime. Now, this last point about local regimes and the understanding and the recognition of local knowledge, of local regimes, is something that I will take up and is a very important part of cultural studies. Now, Barker here again. Barker says that the concept of postmodernism may therefore be comprehended thus. It is a cultural style marked by intertextuality, irony, pastiche, genre blurring, and bricolage. There is no clear-cut, one-dimensional representation of anything. All these intertextuality, bricolage, genre blurring, all the blurring, are involved in representation precisely in order to make the point that there are a plurality of representations, and any one representation of any event, any person, any subject, any object is essentially an act of power. In order to get around this problem, a plurality of meanings, a plurality of representations is preferred in poststructuralism. Therefore, intertextuality, a collage kind of technique, and a certain self-consciousness, a self-reflexivity, these are what mark postmodernism. Another figure here, which I'll come to, I'm just introducing him to you. Here, I'll come to him when I talk about virtual culture, is Jacques Derrida and his work on science and his very important term simulation, where he says that reality today is really a virtuality. Okay, the whole thing moves on the crux of appearance versus reality. Okay, so more about this is just to say that he is somebody who will come up in our discussion. Okay, but simulation is, you could say ironically, the real thing rather than reality as we understand it. Therefore, postmodernism is, it's criticized by many as a culture that is depthless, okay? Because we go for surfaces. Remember Lyotard, we talked about information, knowledge is information, knowledge is data. Baudrillard, okay, as science and simulation, okay, and not reality as we understand it. So postmodernism is often called a depthless culture and life without commitment. If you are always in, with the belief or in the belief, or in a belief system rather, where everything is provisional, everything is an effect of discourse, or everything is virtual, okay, is appearance and not reality, then it is very difficult to lead a life of commitment. And in this sense, it is diametrically, I would say, opposite Marxism, right? So on the one hand, you have the grand narrative, a life of commitment, of practice, of, remember Marx, changing the world, not simply interpreting it. On this side, you have interpretation, okay? You have the impossibility, so to speak, of commitment when the maps of meaning are changing every time, when meaning itself is deferred endlessly, and everything is an act of power. Then this is not seen as possible. This is a problematic issue, and I shall be coming to it later in other lectures, okay? So, well, let's go in for the discussion. And what is our first question here? Our first question could be something like, how are structuralism and poststructuralism related? Okay? Structuralism and poststructuralism are related in the sense, in a temporal sort of way, as something coming after structuralism, right? Poststructuralism is a continuation of structuralism in time. Not only in time, well, it also contains within it so many of the seminal, could say, seminal points in structuralism, and at the same time, it is a critique. That is, it lays bare, okay, it lays bare, the theoretical premises of structuralism in a bid to show that there is something in structuralism which is which somehow seems perhaps to be a neat understanding of something. As the structures are imposed by us on things in a bid to have order, but which apparently, there being no, their order is something that you impose, okay, through structuralism, and things are really far more complex than that. In offering what I said is a critique of structuralism, this point is, furthered by the practitioners of poststructuralism. Next. Yeah. How does, please look at this question here, how does poststructuralism view truth? Okay, how is truth considered? The whole concept, the whole understanding of truth considered in the poststructuralist view. Well, we saw that the answer here is poststructuralism looks at truth simply as a matter of interpretation, as a matter of language games, and of power. That is, poststructuralism holds that there is no objective truth, and that truth is really a linguistic construction, right? And it is tied to power. And Foucault has a book, in fact, called Power/Knowledge. Okay, so truth is understood as these three things. Next question: how did Derrida problematize the structuralist view of difference in language and other science systems? Okay, let's look at it carefully. How did Derrida problematize difference, a key concept in structuralism? Okay, how did, both in language and in science systems? Well, Derrida gave us this French term called difference, which is a combination of two things: to differ and to differ. That is, words have meaning, or signs have meaning, in through a system of difference, and because of meaning emanating only through difference and through relations and not meaning not being referential, okay, meaning is forever deferred. Remember, we saw the term pure, there are no, or the phrase, there are no pure signifiers. Every signifier leads to another signifier, okay. There are no stable or pure signifiers in the science system. Also, in poststructuralism, therefore, meaning is meaning on any count, whether it's meaning in language, whether it's meaning of a literary text, whether it's the meaning of a play that you're watching, or a film that you're watching, okay, or any cultural event that you're watching, a cultural practice. The meaning of everything is therefore endlessly deferred and ultimately undiscoverable. Then, what does this mean for culture? Okay, what are the implications of holding such a theory, okay, for culture? Now, if you have this question, what does this theoretical trust mean for culture? And our answer here would be, as far as identity is concerned, right? Identity, therefore, following the post-structuralist analysis of language and science systems, is always unstable and forever recreated. Okay. Well, I would say, of course, I'm going to talk about this later on also. This is really a liberatory thing to say, in the sense that identity being unstable is something that has to be recreated by you and me. Okay, maybe over and over again. So this gives us a chance not to be tied to a sort of identity. Okay, we can reinvent ourselves. Remember, that's a word we used when we talked about later Foucault. Okay, we can reinvent ourselves through self-reflection and introspection. Next question: what is discourse according to Foucault? According to Foucault, discourse may be defined as a regulated way of speaking about something, about anything for that matter. And the example that we saw was that of man. And what are the discourses? Just a few of them, really. There are so many. What are the discourses that may go into defining man, right? Religion, science, psychiatry, law, and economics. Okay, each of these domains are really discourses, and they have a regulated way of speaking. They are rules of speaking, okay, within this discourse, and you cannot move out of these rules. These discourses have certain terminologies. They have certain terms that you may use, and you may not use other terms here, right? So discourses are also impenetrable as one another is concerned. Okay. Discourse is power, and discourse or knowledge is power, and this creates and controls us as subjects. Next, our question is, explain the crisis that separates modernism from postmodernism. Okay, what is the crisis that led or gave rise to this new school of thought, from modernism to postmodernism? And we saw this through Lyotard, Jean-Francois Lyotard, and the answer here is that the crisis in the humanities and social sciences came about with information technology, with information and communication technology, which gave us a picture or understanding of knowledge as data, okay, knowledge as information. So a certain depth, a certain depthness, if I may say, of knowledge is taken away here and is replaced by sort of surface information. Okay, and this gives rise to an idea that there cannot be any deep truth, there cannot be any objective truth, and truth is subjective, in the sense that truth is, a matter of discourses, and truth is a matter of perspective, of how truth is knowledge, truth is perspective in character. And we also saw that the crisis here is also made very strong by a rejection of big stories, okay, a rejection of meta is that is going beyond meta or grand narratives. For instance, we saw that religion is a grand narrative, science is a grand narrative, Marxism is a grand narrative. So all these are seen as data, as seen as information, as seen as provisional knowledge and partial knowledge. This gives rise to a condition, a confused sort of a cultural condition, which Lyotard calls vertiginous situation, a condition of vertigo. So we have now come to the end of our discussion on post-structuralism, and we come to the end of module 1, and to do a quick recap really before we move on to the next module. What are the things that we looked at in module 1? Module 1 began by talking about understanding cultural studies. 2 lectures were devoted to an understanding of the field, okay, and in which I tried to bring to you certain certain key concepts, right? I just introduced these key concepts to you, and we saw that understanding cultural studies entails looking at culture, okay, as a contested site, right? Then we looked at the scientific point of view of looking at culture, and we began certain theories. So this is all by way of introducing cultural studies to you, right? So I hope these lectures, 10 lectures, were useful for you, and we shall in the next lecture move on to module 2, which is devoted, as I said earlier, to key concepts, and the first topic we would take up is subjectivity. Thank you.